Welcome to the third episode of my series that helps international students adjust to university in China. This week's episode focuses on the top 5 challenges international students face. And they are language barriers, cultural adjustment, academic challenges, social integration, and financial matters. First, let's start with language barriers, Mandarin proficiency. So I put this into 3 categories, as I mentioned in an earlier video. I would say, obviously, if you're taking courses your courses are taught in Mandarin, you need to know Mandarin. So that's obvious. But I would say that if your courses are in English, that you can definitely get by on survival Mandarin. You don't have to fully know Mandarin for day-to-day activities. And I'm evidence of that. I've been in China for 9 years, and shockingly enough, I still can't say I'm bilingual, English and Mandarin, uh, because I survive off survival Chinese. Plus little extras like WeChat. For instance, if you meet someone, you're having problems communicating. Often I do this so we can communicate. I'll just say, oh, can we share WeChat IDs? And once we do that, there is a translation function so we can message each other back and forth. And I've done this lots of times with people that don't really know much English at all, and so you can communicate quite well on WeChat. The other thing to understand is the whole environment in China. Everyone wants to know English, basically, young people anyway. Older people, I would not expect to know English, in their 40s, they're older. But I would say in these and below, and definitely getting into the teens and maybe the teens, you can have a higher expectation that people know some English at least because they take it. Someone told me once there's actually 10 years of English lessons that they take in the education system in China. And so people have taken it for a long time. But what you do find is that they're a little reluctant to speak it because they're afraid of looking silly, mispronouncing things, making mistakes. They're aware that they've learned their English more than likely from a Chinese teacher who wasn't very good at speaking, so related to speaking. So generally they're much better at reading English, but not so good at speaking it. And the only way they've heard it pronounced is by a Chinese speaker, which, tends to be Chinglish. Funny story, just to show you this, is that when I first arrived in Nanjing, to be a professor at the university there, I was with my assistant who was taking me around I had to sign up for to get a cell phone account with one of the local carriers. And so we went into the store and he had this extensive discussion with the girl on the other side about figuring out which plan would be best for me. And I was just there, and they were both chatting back and forth for maybe 5 minutes. And then they both turned to me and said, so, as if they were wanting me to, as if they'd asked me a question or want to get my opinion. And I just looked at them blankly because I didn't understand what the heck, anything that they were talking about. And then they both laughed because from their point of view, they had been speaking English. So that gives you an idea, in terms of pronunciation. And the vast majority of people who've taken English have had a Chinese teacher and not a foreign teacher. Anyway, so this is part of the shyness around knowing English. So when you go out there and you speak English, often people see it as an opportunity. They don't criticize. I've never had anyone really criticize. They might question a little bit, because I've been here a long time, but no one's criticized it. They just kind of, say, oh, they'd like to make friends with me so they can learn their English. And even parents might say, oh, could you teach my son or daughter English, and I'll pay you kind of thing. And so this is pretty common, and it's happened to me all over. And so, if you're an English speaker, or maybe it's not your first language even, but I mean, if you're a pretty good language speaker, you could actually make friends that way by helping them with their English. The vast majority of people want to improve their English because they know, it's the world's dominant language, and that they could, read a lot more books and understand a lot more things, music, and so on, if they knew English. So that's important to understand. So anyway, to summarize, if your courses are in Mandarin, of course you need to learn Mandarin. If they're not, if they're in English or some other language, you don't need to know Mandarin really well to function day to day in China, because you have various apps and things that can help you, and even like a dictionary like Pleco that I use. And so I use a combination of these things to communicate to people. And I mean, like I've gone cycling into rural communities where no one speaks English, and I get by. I get invited in for tea and things like that. And we do have a limited conversation. So it's possible. So that's the main thing. And then the other thing I want you to get is that by no means am I discouraging you from learning Mandarin. I would say take advantage of it when you're a student, because I'm working and it would make life a lot easier if I knew Mandarin, but it takes so much time. It's a difficult language and you really need to focus. You can't be superficial about it. You got to invest the time, and when you're a student, you have that time. The 4-hour class learning English. I've tried some of the classes, so I know what it's like. And I couldn't find the time to practice enough, given the work that I'm doing. I'm always teaching. And so that's why I've have to, be more patient. So I am working on it, but it's going to take a little bit more time. So I'm jealous of students, you guys, who have the time to invest. And I would just say, really strongly encourage you to take advantage of that time. Okay, next topic, cultural adjustment. Things like guanxi and face are major cultural things in China. Guanxi is connections, friendships. And so this is how people get things done or maybe get a good deal on something, is through connections. And so, for instance, I recently met someone when I was in the gym who wanted to invite me to have tea regularly with him and his friends at a tea shop that's in Yantai here. So and I'd recently bought a new computer and working well, but I planned to transfer the files from my old computer. And when I went to do that, I couldn't even access the old computer. I couldn't get into it. There was a problem with Windows, and I'd never had this problem before. I went online, I got coached by Windows to try find a way of getting these files, but nothing worked. And so I told him about my problem, and right away he just said, "Oh, I have a friend who has a computer repair store." And so he was on the phone instantly, calling his friend, setting up the best time to meet, which was literally in a day or two. And I went down. He picked me up here at the university. We drove down to the repair shop, and I think goes back within the hour, and everything had been done. And I even sold my old computer, which I had planned to just toss out, and got some money for it. So anyway, making connections is really important in China to get more things done, access to people, find out about things. And as I mentioned already, I would say English is a good way for you to do that if you know English. I would use that as a way to make friends, make connections. Suggest it, like with WeChat. When you meet someone, just say, oh, can I get your WeChat ID? Would you like to be friends? Again, many Chinese want to have a foreign friend. The vast majority have never had a foreign friend. and never directly communicated with a foreigner. So, this is outside cities like Shanghai, like that's what I'm speaking for. I've lived in the smaller places in China, and this is what I conclude. These places, especially, have not seen that many foreigners. And so I hear this all the time. I'm the first foreigner someone has ever met, and they really want to have a foreign friend. And so just be aware of that when you come here. So anytime you have a chance to interact with Chinese, yeah, highlight that. Would you like to have a foreign friend? That kind of thing. And I could help you with your English. And so these are great ways to guanxi. When it comes to face, I don't really have as much to say about that. I can't say that I've accidentally put my foot in my mouth and caused someone to lose face. I'm just really aware of it as a teacher in the classroom. I'm teaching Chinese students in English. And so, not to embarrass someone, put them on the spot too much, be careful about that. So, it's all about embarrassing someone in front of a group. But it can be quite complicated. Like sometimes, there have been sort of strange things that have happened, and I haven't been able to figure out exactly why. And I just put it down to something to do with face because it goes quite deep. And so it's a pretty complex kind of topic. Like there could be things that you're doing possibly that cause someone to lose face, but to you doesn't really that make sense as to why it does. And so I might have inadvertently done that. All I could say is just be aware of that. You don't want to embarrass someone, so no judging in public of something someone's done, a Chinese person's done. And then the other thing to do with cultural adjustment is the food, cuisine. Now, this is a real issue for a lot of foreign students. I've heard about this, with the foreign students here. For instance, maybe someone from India wants to get their traditional Indian food, but you're not going to find many sort of Indian restaurants in China outside of the big cities like Beijing and Shanghai. These small, they're not that small, but this city here is 7 million, but they're not, you don't see that kind of diversity that you would in a Western country like where I come from. Canada. And so you just have to learn to adapt to the food. So either adapt or cook your own food, make your own dishes. But the first thing I would do, and I'm not sure if all international students do this, because in China, like the universities, I've worked at a couple universities now, and it's unbelievable the variety of the food. And you have to understand there's different food traditions in China. It's about 8 different food traditions. So what I'm used to as that passes for Chinese food in Canada comes from a certain region of China. So that's my view of Chinese food. But I have not even lived in that region since coming to China. So I've lived in some other regions and there's different, completely different food and flavors. And and China has a long history of like there is a diversity of countries that originally comprised the area that China fills now. So just like Europe, this large area of multiple countries, the only difference is in China, they had a unifying kind of culture. And so, developed a single language a few thousand years ago that unified people. So on the surface, it looks kind of homogeneous, and you come across the same kind of cultural values repeatedly, which are essentially Confucian. But underneath that, there's still a lot of diversity. There's its different foods that people are used to, different dialects. And so what I'm getting at here is at the university, you get multiple cafeterias, like I think there's about 7 buildings of cafeterias here. And typically there may be 3 floors of different places where you can buy, your food. And I'm just thinking on one of those floors, I spent some time and just counted how many different venues you could go to. There's about 25 on one floor. And when you think one building has 3 floors, 75, and there's about 7 of them on campus, that's a vast selection of food. I can't imagine any other country has such a diversity of food. It's not all the same. Everyone is slightly different. And so, what are we talking here? We're talking maybe 375 potentially different options of places to buy food from. And then, of course, each of those is going to offer multiple dishes. And then there's also sort of serve yourself. So you just go like, yeah, kind of a buffet. That's the word I'm looking for, a buffet. And so you just choose what you want. So the first thing I'd say is out of university, there's such a diversity of choices that I would search around first and see if you can get something close to the food that you're used to eating. And if that doesn't work out, then you just have to, learn to cook your own food in your apartment, in your dorm. But I mean, I guess you would have to do this at any country that you came to. And so China's no different, other than the diversity here is unbelievable. Coming from Canada, no way do we have this kind of diversity. It's incredible. And so that's my sort of last point about the cuisine. So the next major topic is academic challenges. And so that would be, I would say, exam. So there's a real focus on rote learning in Chinese education and writing exams to measure people's knowledge of the material. And so there's lots of studying for exams. And so you have to get used to that. Not so much critical thinking, not so much focus on creative thinking, and not so much focus on student participation in the class. So it's really traditional that teachers just, the expert in the classroom, they present the material, you, you know, write it down, record it, and learn to memorize it. So, I mean, it's easy to criticize that sort of model, but I do think it is superior to us in the West because it's about mastery in China. It's about really knowing the material. And I think you need both. You need to have mastery of the material before you can start doing creative things with it or critically analyzing it. So I would argue the combination of what you get in China, which is discipline and getting to know the material in a deep way, mastery over the material, and then maybe later on doing education in the West, and then you get the critical thinking, the creative thinking. I think the combination of those two would be deadly. And so that's what I would say about examinations and student involvement too. So it's just learning to be disciplined and listen. And so these would be the kind of challenges if you're used to more of a Western style approach to teaching. The next topic would be social integration. So I've talked a little bit about this already, I guess, in language and meeting people, making friendships. So this is more about cultural differences. And I've already given you a sense of that I would say, even just to add to this, I'm from Toronto, born and raised, the world's #1 most multicultural city. So people living in Toronto, we have a kind of a respect or a knowledge of diversity and maybe curious about exploring other cultures. So we have different festivals where each culture can, cook their own food and we go around and buy them from all different countries. I think I do, as someone from that kind of place, I kind of feel like I feel a little bit of that here in China. And I think it's a reflection of that history that China used to be a whole bunch of different countries like Europe. It's only been unified under a single kind of culture. They still have 50, there's the Han majority ethnicity here, and there's 55 other minorities in China, and different, representing different religions, Islam, and so on, and even speaking different dialects, of course, and different ways of living and living in different places of China, more remote places. And so China is well aware of this diversity. It was one end of the Silk Road, like the world came to China. And it actually has a history. The once Xi'an, the modern day Xi'an, where the terracotta warriors are, what used to be called Chang'an about 1400 years ago. And that's when it was booming. And it was the world's largest single city. And it was the most multicultural city in the world because you had people coming from all over the world along the Silk Road and even settling in Chang'an at the time. And so this was the peak of Chinese civilization. And so there was and China really dreams about going back to that period of time. So the image in China is of kind of unifying people from different cultures. And so there is a kind of respect for that culture. So that's another thing I think it's important for you to understand. There is a kind of interest and curiosity about different cultures. It's not really ignoring you. I've never felt ignored. Actually, I feel treated better than many Chinese. I get faster service when I come into a place. Now, it could be because I'm white, could be because I'm older, for sure. But I think you stand out. If you're a foreigner, people are going to watch you. And the general feeling is that you're different, you're interesting, even if you have darker skin and so on. There's just a curiosity because you're different. They're not used to seeing that in China. And so that's the whole kind of in terms of social integration. I would say it's actually much more open to foreigners than I expected in thinking the average Chinese person. Often they'll try and strike up a conversation with you on the street, even an older person, not just young. And of course the problem often is Mandarin, but you try your best to communicate. And so I've had all sorts of people, run into people, have conversations because they want to know where you're from and how old you are and what you're doing here. Are you working? Are you a tourist or whatever? And so I find there's this openness to foreigners that I didn't expect in China and such an ancient civilization. So I think that's really important to understand when you come here, and so not to be gripped by fear about that. Now, the last topic is financial affairs. And so handling transactions in RMB. Well, the first thing to know about that is that China is basically like a cashless society now. When I first came to China about, what was it, 12 years ago, um, I was still using cash, just like back in Canada. It didn't feel that different. I'm trying to think. I guess I paid a few things on using WeChat, but nowadays it's everything. I don't even remember the last time I used cash. And actually to use cash now it's a hassle because while shop owners are required to have change with them in case you want to use cash, usually they don't, because no one is using cash. And so if they need to get change for you because you decide to use cash, they need to run to other shop owners and say, hey, can you, give me some change? I need to, give back to this foreigner who's buying something, just bought lunch or whatnot. And so it takes a while. You got to wait until they find the cash to give it back to you, the change. And so basically everything is on WeChat now. And that basically what that involves is when you first come to China, you want to sign up for a bank account, which is a big hassle. I think it's the number one issue that I've dealt with in China, banks, transferring money and so on. It just takes so long and you need someone to help you. And it's difficult to navigate when you don't know Chinese, definitely. But even if you do, it's still difficult. So it would take hours, for instance, to transfer money for me. But nowadays, as I say, it's all WeChat and even transferring money. There's now a new app and it's all in English, and I can easily transfer money using WeChat, back to Canada. And so it's just WeChat. And so it's very simple. This is all your food, meals, and even on the side of the street. You just scan the QR code and pay. And it's super easy. And, WeChat comes in Chinese version and international English version. So very easy to use. So I just told you about an earlier story of selling my old computer back to this guy who did help me transfer my files. Well, they had to pay me that money, and I don't know if I'd ever used that function before where someone is paying me money. I've only been paying out using WeChat, but I figured it out right away. It was right there in English, and I just had to press another button, and instantly I had the money they were paying me for my computer. I mean, instantly. I mean, seconds. And so it's incredible. There is no place in the world that is so cashless, I am sure. And China is number one. So this is one of the incredible things about China that you'll find that will actually make life very, very easy in terms of payment. And so those are the 5 challenges that international students can potentially face when coming to China to study. So that's it for this week, and I'll see you next week for week 4's topic.